Now that we understand the lay of the land in terms of the Moto UI, let's actually build something. We're going to make a sort of a pitcher shape, maybe sort of a cream pitcher. And we're going to do that very simply using some very basic tools. We're not going to worry about dimensionality or anything like that. We're just going to keep things simple, make a shape, and play around. So to start with, let's use that Control Space Pi menu to head to the front view. And by the way, remember, when you do the Control Space Pi, you don't have to click anything. Don't click on the front view, just let go, and that'll take you there. Then we're going to make a unit cylinder by holding Shift and clicking the cylinder tool. And that should give us a cylinder. We need to go, if we're in polygon selection mode, you can select all these polys, right? And there are way too many of them. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and you notice instead of clicking each of these to select them, watch this. If I just drag over them to select them, then down here at the bottom right of the viewport it says 12 polygons. So I know I've got 12 spans here, which is just a nice quick way to count something like that. I'll click off to deselect. This is just extemporaneous detail at this point. To be honest, we really just need a very, very basic cylinder, and then we can add that detail later as we need it. So let's go to Edge Selection Mode. As you might guess, you can of course head up to the Modes bar and click it, but instead I'm just going to hit the number 2 on the QWERTY keyboard. To do that, that's my muscle memory does that. I've memorized 1, 2, 3, and 5. I use those pretty much all the time. They're very, very common. So as you get used to Moto, you might want to get used to that keyboard shortcut. Now, I'm going to select all of these edges in the middle, not the top and the bottom one, just these middle ones. And if you get any extras, of course, just hold the Control key and drag over them to deselect, okay? And then I'm going to hit the L key for loop. Now, we could head up to Select and down to Loop, and remember our keyboard shortcut by looking right here at the L key, and that would do the same thing. Either way you do it, the result is that you get the entire edge loop for each one of these. Now, if I head back to perspective view, you'll see what that means, right? Make sense? Okay, so front view. And I'm going to delete those by hitting the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac, and that should take care of us. Now, I want to grab this bottom edge loop just by double-clicking it. That's another thing about selecting edge loops. Let's go back to perspective mode. If you click on an edge, that selects it, of course. If you double-click on an edge, that will select its entire explicit loop, or implicit loop, I should say. We'll go to the front view again, and I want to move this up. So let's hit W for move, or you could come over to the toolbar and click the move command, whichever you prefer. You'll notice I'm going to use the W key because it's just my muscle memory. It's what I'm used to. And as I move this, I'd kind of like to snap it to the origin, right? And so for that, a grid snap would be helpful. Fortunately for us, Moto 801 has fantastic snapping. Finally, snapping rocks in Moto. So let's head up to the snapping button here to enable basic snapping. And then head over into our tool properties, and we'll now have a snapping button. Click that, and make sure that grid snap is enabled. Perfect. Now, when we turned on snapping, it did move our action center a little bit here. So let's go to Action Center Automatic, and that will move that action center to the middle of our selection, even though it's not currently on a grid snap. Now we can drag this up on the y-axis and notice that we are now snapping that action center to each grid line, and we can just snap it right here to the origin. Perfect. So now I'm going to escape to drop the tool, and Alt-Shift to pan up. And this time, instead of double-clicking an edge to get the loop, I'm just going to use an alternate method. Works exactly as well. It's just fine. And that is to middle mouse on one side, drag a lasso around, and let go of the middle mouse on the other side. Remember, in the last video, I said with your tablet, if you are using a Wacom tablet, the upper button should be mapped to the middle mouse because you will use middle mouse quite a bit in Moto. Now we'll head back to that Move tool. Again, I'm using the W key. You can use the GUI if you want. And I'll just drag this up to, I don't know, whatever I think. I think 1.5 meters looks just fine. This is going to be a very large cream pitcher for people who drink lots and lots of cream, apparently. We'll go back to perspective mode. R for scale, and you'll notice the scale tool has been selected here in the toolbar. You can do it either way. And you might wonder, W for move and R for scale? Why on earth? That just seems random. Actually, it's not. It's not that W stands for move in linguistics. Of course, move doesn't have the letter W in it. But W, E, and R are very convenient keys on the keyboard. They're right next to each other and right under your left hand if your left hand is resting on the Control-Alt-Space area as it normally is. So these are just co-located on the keyboard. That's why they are what they are. So very ergonomic choice. Anyway, so let's grab the center cyan sort of circle to scale on all three axes simultaneously. We're just going to squish in the top of this a little bit. Now, probably not quite that much. I'm thinking something like that probably looks okay. And hit Escape to drop the tool, and Escape to drop our selection. Now, that should take care of it for us. I'm going to head back up here and disable snapping, because I think we're done with that for the time being. And we can actually continue to work on this form. So next, I'd like for the bottom of this to be rounded off a little bit. So let's double-click this edge to get the edge loop, and head over to the bevel command. Now, in the past, when we've run the bevel command, it's been on a polygon, which does one thing, but if we bevel on an edge, it does something very different. As you can see, it actually creates something that industrial designers would call an edge round or a fillet, and rounds off the selected edge. Now, this is currently creating what we would call a chamfer, which is basically a flat round. It's straight all the way around. But if I head down here to the round level and increase it to 1, that's going to add an edge loop in between, and you can see those are sort of roughly roundish. And if I add a lot more of them, it gets increasingly smooth. But we are going to use SDS subdivision here to smooth this out, so really we only need the one span. That should be just fine for us. Hit Escape to drop that bevel tool, and Escape to drop the selection again. Let's look at the bottom of this thing, and I'd like to create a bit more geometry down here for reasons that we'll learn about as we learn more about sub-D modeling. But suffice it to say, let's head to Polygon Selection Mode, select a polygon, and then head over to our tools and run the bevel tool again. From now on, I'm going to hit B for bevel, because that is probably the most commonly used modeling tool in Modo. It's just a very powerful tool, does a lot of stuff. I'll click in the viewport to activate it, drag the red handle to pull in some polys, and then shift-click to reactivate it, pull it again, shift-click to reactivate, pull it in one more time, and Escape to drop the tool, and Escape to drop the selection. We've basically just added a bunch of flat polygons down here, which will help with our smoothing later on. So again, practicing with that bevel tool is going to be very important. Now, we do not need the top poly here, so let's just delete that polygon. And notice that we can only see the front faces of our polys. If we look at the inside of this guy, everything is transparent. That's because polygons in Modo are one-sided. They are always one-sided, whether you know it or not. You can actually make polygons appear to be two-sided by shading the insides. That is possible, but you will not be able to select them. So make sure that you are just kind of aware of which direction your polygons go. Okay, so right now they're facing out, which is what we want. We won't be able to select those back polygons from here. We'd have to rotate our view to get to those. There's some nuance there. There's some preferences involved. You can actually change that if you prefer, but this is actually a really good way to work, and I think you'll get used to it and learn to like it. I promise. Okay, so next we want to slice this up and add some of that detail that we deleted earlier on back in. Okay, we don't like having these long, thin polygons. I'd rather break this up into something closer to squares. So let's select a few of these polys. It doesn't matter. Really, it could just be two. It doesn't matter how many, as long as there is more than one defining a direction of a loop on our model. You see what I mean? Let's head over to the Mesh Edit tools and click the Loop Slice tool. Click in the viewport to activate it, and we have now a loop slice in our view. To create more than one, we can set the count parameter up to, I don't know, let's say 5. That's not quite enough. Let's go up to 8, and that looks pretty good. I hit enter, by the way, after I changed this number, and that took care of it for us. So I'm happy with this result. Let's hit escape to drop the tool and escape to drop the selection. Now we have a nice even mesh. When you're working in sub D, it's very helpful to keep your polygons roughly the same size as much as possible. It's not going to be, you don't be extreme about it. They don't all have to be exactly the same size. But loosely speaking, these should be somewhat proportional all the way down. Now when I hit the Tab key, everything smooths nice and evenly. You'll see that at the bottom of this, we get a nice, smooth, even round, and that looks just fine. Hit Tab again to go back to faceted mode, though, because most of the time when we're working in sub D, we're going to spend all of our time working in the cage view, because that gives us a more accurate representation of what our geometry is doing. And then just hit the Tab key to smooth it temporarily while we decide if we like it. That's just a good practice, trust me. Okay, so let's head back to our basic tools and down to the Thicken command. Click in the viewport to run it, and then drag the blue handle to pull these polys in, and you'll notice that we're thickening all the way down to the bottom as well. Getting a nice clean thicken operation all the way down. It doesn't matter how thick we go because, as I say, we're not working to any specific dimensions right now. Hit Escape to drop the Thicken tool, and then Tab, and everything smooths out. Great. Now, I'm not sure I like the top of this, though. I really don't want it to be quite so sharp. I'd like to kind of actually have two sharp edges. I really, if I go to Edge Selection Mode and select these two edges, I'd like for those to be relatively crisp, right? So when I hit the Tab key, you see that these are perfectly smooth, and we get one sort of pointy edge at the top. And instead, I would like to set these to be, I don't know, a little bit sharper. So there are a couple ways to do that. One way is to actually use edge weighting. Okay, so let's go to our Vertex Map menu and down to the Weight tool. That's Shift W on the keyboard. We're going to use this one quite a bit as well when we're modeling. Click here on that tool to run it. Nothing happens. Our weight is set to 0. Now click and drag to the right in the viewport, and you notice that that weight in the properties is increasing, and as it does, we're getting sharper and sharper edges. I'm not going to go all the way to 100%. I'm just going to get it so that it's just somewhat sharp. Hit Escape to drop the tool, and Escape to drop the selection, and that looks much more like it. That's more what I'm after in our smooth result. Now, we haven't added any topology here. If I hit Tab, our cage looks exactly the same as it ever did, but when we hit Tab now, we have these nice hard edges added using those weights. Edge weights are incredibly powerful. We definitely want to use those to their best advantage. So one last detail on this shape, we need to add a pore spout. So on one side, I'm going to select a few edges, probably just these top 3, head to the front view, and I just want to rotate those out. I'll hit E for rotate, or click the rotate icon over in the basic toolbar. That's fine. And notice that we're sort of rotating from the center of the selection. That's not quite the behavior that I want. If I head to Action Center, make sure I'm in Automatic Action Center mode. With an Automatic Action Center, I can actually move the Action Center by clicking anywhere I like, just an arbitrary location in space. So if I click down here, my Action Center moves, and now I'm rotating about that new center, which is extremely helpful to know about. Action Centers are very, very powerful, and you're going to get a lot of use out of them here in Modo. So I'll just rotate this out, go back to Perspective View, and examine it. Now this is looking okay, but obviously we're looking a little bit stretched here on the inside. I'm going to hit Escape to drop the tool, and let's massage this form a little bit to get it looking a little bit less pinched. So I'll go to Vertex Selection Mode. It looks like we have a selection here. Let's click off in space to deselect. I'm going to grab these two interior vertices, R for scale, and just pinch those in a little bit. W for move, and then move those down. And you notice when I do the move, I'm dragging this circle. The circle is, in this case, for the Y and X axes at the same time. So instead of having to drag these one at a time, the circle just lets me do both at once, which is a nice shortcut. And also with the top of this vertex, I want to pull that back some. So W for move, we'll pull that back a little bit, just until we like the result a little bit better. It makes things look a little bit more even. Now, once again, on these guys, I'll go back, select those by holding the Shift key while clicking both of them. There we go. Scale those in. There we go. That is looking more like it. That is the basic shape that I want, and I like that top edge. Looks pretty good. And you can imagine I could spend some time being more finicky, being more persnickety with this and make this a nice even offset all the way around. But this serves our purposes. Okay, so the one last thing we want to do with this is add a handle. And we're going to do this in a very simple way. You could take this much further if you want to. But I'm just going to grab a couple of polys. Let's go to polygon selection mode. Make sure nothing is selected. And then select a couple of polygons here on our mesh. I'll hit B for bevel, or click the bevel tool in the toolbox, of course. And then click in the viewport to activate it. I'm going to pull this out ever so slightly, and also scale it in ever so slightly. And I might actually hit the R for scale tool and scale it up ever so slightly, so it's basically roughly square here. Next, I'm going to B for bevel again, click in the viewport, and pull this out some. Now, you'll notice that when I pull this out, if I pull it all the way out, it's going to actually grow and get really kind of big at the bottom, and that's not what I want. I really want it to go straight out. So a strict bevel operation isn't quite what I want. Beveling always is going to bring things out along their current normal, which in this case will pull out sort of a thick tongue at the end. So instead of that, what I'll do is just bevel it out ever so slightly, so that it's just created the geometry, but no more. And then run the move tool and use that to move it out. So that's going to move it out without dealing with the geometric normal of the original, or the direction of the original, so that we get just a straight tongue sticking out here. Now I'll hit Escape to drop the tool and Escape to drop my selections. Just hit it a few times. And then Tab key to go back to our faceted mode, just so we can see what we have here. Now, this is going to need some more geometry. What we want to do is bend this around, but right now, if we were to bend this, it's just going to rotate that whole thing, which is not right. We need to bend it. So let's select a few of these, just defining a direction. Go to our Mesh Edit command and hit Loop Slice again. Click in the viewport to run that. And I'm thinking those 8 subdivisions should be enough. Once again, the rule of thumb is, do they look similar in size to these others? And they do. And this should be plenty to get a decent handle. Hit Escape to drop the tool and Escape to drop the selection. And one last thing, I kind of just want this to be a little bit flatter. So let's grab these bottom polys just by dragging over all of them to paint select those polys. W for move, and I'm just going to move those up a little. Hit Escape to drop the tool, click to deselect. Let's go to the front view, and then we're going to bend these. Let's use the middle mouse to lasso select all these polygons. Head to our Deform tools, and let's find the Bend tool. Notice that's Control E. It has a shortcut because this is another very useful tool you may find yourself using quite frequently. Now, with the Bend tool, it's best to click in the viewport at a location where you want to bend from. So we'll just start right here. Let's say we want to start there. It's going to drop our action center right where we clicked. And also it's going to drop this other handle out here in space at the other extent of our selection by default. That's where you want this to be, so that the purple line runs along the stuff that you want to bend. Then we're going to pull this blue handle to rotate this around. Now, I want to actually show you that you can adjust this on the fly by moving this center. Notice by dragging this little cyan crosshairs in the center, we can move the action center to define how this bend works. We can also move the other end of it, and that's going to help define how the move works as well. But really, I want that to stay pretty much just the way that it was. Okay, hit Escape to drop the tool, Escape to drop the selection, and Tab to smooth it out. That's looking pretty dandy to me. One last thing, I would like to merge this with the back with the bottom half, otherwise this handle would be very fragile, would probably break off. So let's select these 2 polygons here. Hold Shift and select the corresponding polygons on our main body here. Head over to the Basic toolbar and down to the Bridge command. Bridge is another very powerful tool we're going to use quite a bit. It does lots of neat stuff. Click in the viewport. That should take care of it. If you get weird stuff happening, make sure your segments are set to 0, your twist is set to 0, and that should get a result very much like this one. Hit Escape to drop the tool, and we are done, folks. That is our first Moto model. And make sure to save your work. And in the next video, we'll make a pretty picture.